One more time, shall we? Why let people in? What, Colonel Matthew Morand, what song was that? Can you name that too?
Semper Supra, sir, the new Space Force song.
Do you know the lyrics?
No, sir, I do not.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
All right. Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us to our VBC Happy Hour. I am Todd DiPastino, and this is our weekly program of the Veterans Breakfast Club. Tonight, we welcome Colonel Matthew Morand with us. And because our topic is the United States Space Force, which is our youngest branch of service and probably our least understood, we will talk about its mission, its operations, what makes it distinct from the Air Force, from NASA. And as always, we will invite and expect all of you to have questions and your expert comments. Again, my name is Todd DiPastino. I'm the executive director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a Pittsburgh-based nonprofit that has been around since 2008. So this is our 15th year of programming, our 15th year of doing veterans storytelling programs. And we're just coming up on our third year of taking these programs online, like we're doing tonight on Zoom, and having the benefit of being able to speak to veterans, half a world away. People outside of our area, people like Kenneth Boyd, who I was talking with before we went live here in Hawaii, and of course, people like Colonel Morand, who's in South Carolina. We do this program every Monday night. It's what we call it VBC Happy Hour. Every night is a different theme. We focus on a different event, different branch, different kind of experience. Different backgrounds of veterans, different populations of veterans in the military community. And tonight we're talking about Space Force. Last week, you might recall that we focused our conversation on the 55th anniversary of the Tet Offensive. And we had a great deal of Vietnam veterans with us talking about their experiences during the Tet Offensive. And I'm looking here in the room, in the Zoom room. Renee, just put a box in the mail to you. Same to you, Mark. You're getting a box very soon. I'm looking for Sam Christie. Sam Christie, Donut Dolly. She was going to share a little bit of her story. She had a problem with her. She had a problem with her microphone last time. Well, while we wait for Sam to come on board, I do want everybody to say hi to Avi Hall. Let me see if I can spotlight you guys here. Spotlight for everybody. Hello, Avi. How are you? Avi?
There you go. There she is.
Avi, you have a little brother. What's his name?
Isaac.
Hi, Isaac. Isaac's just a little baby. Isaac is 1 week old. For those of you who don't know, this is Sean Hall. He's our director of programming. He is on paternity leave, but here he is with his wonderful, beautiful family, just joining us for a few minutes. Avi Hall and now Isaac, the youngest member of the Veterans Breakfast Club.
He's wearing blue tonight in to honor BBC. He's got his
Sean,
blue beret on.
I am going to put you on the spot. If you had to choose one branch of service for Isaac to serve in, and Avi, what would it be? Look at Jeff Witherell laughing. What would it be? Jeff Witherell's laughing.
Avi's going to be a drill instructor because she's been making sure the house is running while we've been away at the hospital.
Good.
And if Isaac's fight is any indication, he's probably going to be a Marine if he were to go. But he's this kid could fight the world every time I change his diaper. So,
Isn't that amazing?
yeah.
Well, Sean, congratulations and best wishes for you and your family and Isaac. I know that you're off for another 4 weeks or so, and we'll miss you, but please do feel free to drop in whenever you can. Would love to have you.
Will do. Thanks, guys. Hi, everybody. We'll talk soon.
All right, now let's see if I could take you off Spotlight. Not sure if I can do that. I think I can. Let's see. Maybe if I put myself on Spotlight. Replace Spotlight. There you go. I'm Spotlight now. All right, here we go. All right, and then I will have to figure out how to get myself off Spotlight. Geez, there's so much that I remove Spotlight. Okay, now I'm having it just speaker's view. Okay, here we go. All right, I do not see Sam Christie in the room yet, so we will wait for that. And while we do, I will just maybe say a few words about our sponsors. D&D Auto Salvage has been a wonderful and important sponsor for us for years now. And they are a family-owned, state-of-the-art auto salvage and recycling business, 3 decades of metal recycling under their belts. And they serve industry and they serve individual scrappers. And the company has a fleet of trucks and heavy equipment that can remove and process scrap of any kind in a variety of locations. D&D is very proud and dedicated supporter of veterans, and especially the mission of the Veterans Breakfast Club. And we're deeply indebted to them for sponsoring our events online and in person. We're very grateful to them for that. We're also grateful to Adagio Health, and Adagio Health provides health, wellness, nutrition services, and support for women and families, especially in Pennsylvania and 7 counties in West Virginia. And they have a program focused on tobacco use, on educating people about the hazards of tobacco use, encouraging people to quit their use of tobacco, and helping to advocate for safer places to live, work, and play. Tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org is where you can go to learn more about their mission and services. If you are addicted to tobacco or vaping, you can call their 1-800-QUIT-NOW line, and they will help you and help counsel you to quit. Oh, Bill Confer, look at you. You raised your hand already. That's excellent. I was just about to get into the hand raising issue. I'm going to ask you to unmute. How are you, Bill?
Okay, how are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, I just wondered if you could give us an update on the 50th anniversary for the Vietnam vets at Heinz, what is it, the Heinz Hall there in Pittsburgh coming up?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, that was on my agenda. I was gonna bring it up later tonight, but I will do it right now. We are doing a special event. We like to do a special event for Vietnam Veterans Day, which, as you know, is March 29th. It's a day that I think most Americans are not aware of, but I got to tell you, Vietnam veterans know it very well, and it means a lot to them. And I was surprised when we first did our first Vietnam Veterans Day event in, I think it was 2020. We first did it. I was really stunned by the response. It was so wonderful, and it reminded me why it was so necessary. So that's all to say that we're having a special event again on March 29th. It'll start at 6 p.m. Eastern, and it'll be in person and online, both. A hybrid event. In person, it'll be at the Senator John Heinz History Center here in Pittsburgh, which was just recently voted by USA Today one of the top 20 history museums in the nation. And they are going to partner with us to host this event. We expect at least a couple hundred people to be there. We'll have speakers. We'll have a pinning ceremony. Every veteran who comes, who served between 1955 and 1975, will get a welcome home bag filled with goodies from the Veterans Breakfast Club and from our sponsors. And if you can't make it in person, we will ship the bag out to you. And we will hope that you'll be able to join us online, and we'll be able to recognize each and every Vietnam era veteran who will be joining us that night. That is the whole idea, is to honor, recognize, and celebrate our Vietnam veterans. And what I will do, you do have to register for the event. And what I'm going to do is add in the chat the link to the web page that we have for this event, where you could click and register. All right. Does that answer your question, Bill? Good, good, very good. Now, Bill does bring up this issue of raising hands, and he was able to, I don't know what exactly device that Bill is on, but if he was on a desktop computer, he's able to go to the bottom to reactions at the Zoom, if he's using the Zoom app, and click reactions, and then you can see the button to raise your hand. We ask people to do that because I've muted everybody so that we don't have cacophony here in the Zoom room. But if you go down here, if you're using the Zoom app on your computer, you can click raise hand. That puts you right at the top of my, that's it. Jana Schultz, you pulled it off. If you're using an iPad, you can go up to participants and click it, and then you see raise hand down there. If you are using a phone, you go down to the lower right, you click more and can click your raise hand right there. If you're calling in by phone, and we do have people to do that, you do *9 will get your hand up, and then *9 will take your hand back down. And you know what? If you don't do any of these things, you could just go like this. And chances are I will see you, or somebody will tell me, hey, Bill's waving his hand in front of the camera. So it's just to get my attention so that I could ask you to unmute, and then you could make your comment or ask your questions. All right. How are we doing, Colonel? Colonel Matthew Morand, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I appreciate it.
You are joining us, correct, from South Carolina?
Yes, sir. Charleston, South Carolina.
And I should let people know that you are the commander of the Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps Detachment 765 at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. You're responsible for the supervision and training of one of the largest cadet corps in the Air Force, with over 500 cadets. And you serve as a professor of aerospace studies.
Yes, I do. That's just
Wow.
the academic side. The academic side has to give me a special title. I'm just a Space Force officer teaching. Space
Force is, of course, 3 years old. You've been in the Air Force for coming up 28 years. You come from a military family, but not an Air Force family. Is that correct?
That's correct. Almost all of my family was Army. So my grandfather was an Army armor officer. Grandmother was an Army nurse. My father was an Army infantry officer. Brother was an armor officer. I got to the Citadel, was an Army ROTC for a few years, and the Citadel was already taking away lots of my weekends, and then the Army wanted me to go on more FTXs instead of Claymores and dig foxholes and things, and I thought, man, those Air Force guys are doing fun, so they go on a PT run, and then they're gone. And so I switched. Actually, I wanted to be a little bit more technical than what I was doing at the time, and so that's why I switched to the Air Force and now the Space Force.
Wow, so you were the smart member of the family, huh?
I wouldn't go that far. I've never been accused of being the smartest.
How great. And how did your family react to you going to the Air Force side?
Oh, lots of jokes, lots and lots of them, as you can imagine. The zoomy jokes, yes, you like air conditioning, you like all of the comfortable hotels versus the other things. So yes, I'm used to it. It's okay.
And Colonel, before the program started and you and I were talking a little bit, I said that I swore to myself before I started tonight that I wouldn't crack any Space Force jokes, because I looked at, we posted this event online and we got some comments. Every single one was a joke. Every single one, every single comment. So I'm going to try and refrain from jokes. You said don't even try to refrain because you've heard them all.
It's okay. I'm used to it. When you name yourselves, instead of, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, we're guardians. Yeah. And my children who are 18 and 21 say, oh, the Guardians of the Galaxy, Dad, just like the movies. And then it just goes on from there. So I'm used to it. It's okay.
Though, sir, when I have been doing research for tonight's program and really digging into the history of this young branch of service and, why it was carved out of the Air Force and its predecessor, its Space Force Command, within the Air Force. My question really became, why didn't this happen sooner? Because I mean, space as a domain of warfare, as a potential domain of warfare, has been around for quite a while. And could you give us a sense, just a quick overview of Space Force's mission and how it differs from the other branches?
Yes, sir. We've talked about making or wanting to make the Space Force a separate service for a long time. When I was a lieutenant, we were talking 20-something years ago, but it wasn't quite necessary. And it was a little bit rushed when it happened this time. Many of us were surprised about that. Right. So the space mission has been going on, as you mentioned, with an Air Force Space Command. Army had FA-40s who started out as maybe an infantry officer, armor officer, that transferred to a FA-40 MOS and did that. The Navy, even the Marines had a few folks doing something space related. And then finally, it was decided, a little more than 3 years ago, that because of funding, because of the threats of in space, you'll hear people talk about space as congested and contested. And I'll get into a little bit more of that in a few minutes about what the threats are and why. But because of the budget, I mean, the space, so I'll get into it in a second, but I worked in the National Reconnaissance Office. One launch for what's now, you can say it, a spy satellite was almost $2 billion, just one satellite for those. And so that's a huge chunk of budget. And so the Air Force was tired of, we're getting way too much of our budget taken by the space folks. And now there are more threats into space. And I'll go through a few of the threats we can talk about and why it's become its own domain. Now, we're not shooting things in space yet, but I'll talk to you about slow motion dogfights, getting the sun to your back, just like you would if you were a pilot, and the kinds of threats that we're seeing from other countries.
So is most of the work of Space Force kind of defending, protecting, and developing assets, you could call them, in space, satellite systems, rocket systems, missiles, that kind of thing?
Yes, sir. So when I get asked, I go talk to schools all the time because the Space Force likes us to go out and talk to schools. The basic, I'm a business major from a school in South Carolina, so I'm not like really technically smart, but they have me do these things, right? The Wayward School for Boys in Charleston. But so basically, Space Force, we acquire, build, launch, and operate satellites and the ground systems that operate them and the communications cyber systems that connect them. That's our job. That's like the basic bare bones things that I can understand as a business major, right? And so that's how I explain it to folks.
Okay, I have a lot of questions and a comment. And I'm going to jump ahead to this because it just popped in my mind. I was at a wonderful event here in Pittsburgh last May with 200 young men and women who were all joining the service in various branches of service. And they each walked up and got recognized. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing to see these young people. And after a while, I felt like I could start picking out, oh yeah, that kid's a Marine. Oh yeah, that kid's Army. And I could also then, I thought I was able to start picking out the few Space Force recruits. What do you think they look like?
They are much more technologically savvy than I was as a young one. So I imagine some are probably going to have glasses, a little skinnier kids, and big brains, like a big noggin, lots of brain in there.
That's it. That was absolutely the sense. Like, oh, these kids are kids who scored high on their SATs. These kids did well in school, and they have an intellectual capacity that has been ignited, I think, by their prospects of Space Force. That was the sense I got. Several people, as we were preparing for the program, brought up this, which has been in the news this past week, the Chinese surveillance balloon that apparently hit 80,000 feet, came over North America and the United States of America. It was shot down, I believe, yesterday by not Space Force, but I think an Air Force F-22. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's correct.
And the Chinese say it was a weather balloon. The U.S. certainly suspects that it was more than that. And now I think there are teams trying to recover parts of the balloon to see what, in fact, it was. Is Space Force, would they be tracking this kind of thing?
Yes, sir. So My last job, I was in the National Reconnaissance Office, and until 1993, you couldn't even say that it existed. It was a classified organization. And until a few years ago, you couldn't say that it was spy satellites. So we do imagery satellites and signals intelligence satellites. So when this thing starts floating, we have satellites that are going over in a low Earth orbit doing imagery, and they're going over at 17,000 miles per hour. So every 90 to 98 minutes. And that's going to come over and take images of whatever you're telling it to point at. So I'm sure we were getting imagery from above and obviously from below, like the one you have, trying to figure out what the payloads are on those things. We also have signals intelligence satellites, which are out at a farther out orbit, that are basically just listening to all the signals that they possibly can. Now, you're not normally pointing those at the United States because it's domestic signals intelligence. You're normally going to point it at someone else, but you get permission for something like this to listen and see what they're either transmitting back, or you might be able to see what they are collecting on. And so while I get asked the question as a military member, why didn't we just shoot it down early on? Well, maybe we were able to collect and see what they were collecting on. If we're able to hide the things we don't want them to see, and we can collect and see what they're collecting, we know what's interesting to them. So that may be why. But I'm at a school now, so I'm still read into a lot of stuff, but I don't have any classified systems to get any of the good gouge, and I couldn't tell you even if I knew.
And there are I've seen different figures, and it seems to be over 2,000 satellites orbiting the Earth right now.
Operational satellites, I want to say it's in the 3,000 range, but there are 30 to 35,000 pieces that we can track right now in space, so that we can deconflict where we launch things or when we're moving things, or the International Space Station. And there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of more pieces we can't track because they're so small.
Yes, Travis just put it in the chat. Not only are there millions of pieces of space junk orbiting the Earth, since this was never considered to be a problem during the first 25 to 30 years of space exploration, much of that debris is in the easiest to access, most desirable orbits to use, the NEO. Travis, you should be in Space Force. Jeez. Yes, more than 1 million identified pieces of space debris are between 1 and 10 centimeters are orbiting the Earth. And out of that million, 30,000 pieces are over 10 centimeters. Can you explain, Colonel, the difference between Space Force and NASA?
Sure. Yes, sir. So Space Force is really doing the military side of things. Now, we are partners with NASA. We own the ranges and the launch pads, the majority of them, or we lease them to some of the companies in NASA. So at Cape Canaveral, or Patrick Space Force Base, and at Vandenberg Space Force Base in Santa Barbara, California, we have launch pads and a range where we will either lease to somebody to launch, or we will launch for them. If let's say a launch is going up and something starts to go off course, our range officers are the ones that will blow it up, so it's not over land or a populated area. That's why we launch where we launch from. So in California, you're going to launch up over the poles. Actually, you're going to launch down and come up over the pole because it's over the water. In Florida, you're going to launch out over the Atlantic Ocean. And so that, again, if something were to go wrong with the launch, a range officer can hit the button and blow it up before it causes any damage to people. The whales and the fish, on the other hand, not so lucky.
Wow. Jeff Witherell, you have your hand up?
Yes, sir. I was going to ask, what's the demarcation criteria between the Air Force and Space Force in terms of missions, in terms of, like, I can understand the balloon, I can understand your satellites, but how do you handle like a high altitude fast mover or another aircraft like a U-2 type aircraft?
Yes.
Who takes on that responsibility?
Right.
So it would be both. So the responsibility for shooting things down, Space Force isn't doing any of those things yet. But to track it, the Air Force will certainly track it with the assets they have. And then we have lots of assets in space, which we can also track things with. The demarcation, people will ask, like, what makes an astronaut? Some people will say 80 miles, some people will say 100 miles. But for us, things that go into space and stay up there in orbit at least a part amount of time, that's when Space Force is involved and begins to track it, because we're worried about International Space Station, some of our high value assets in those low Earth orbits, or someone called that near Earth orbit. And so that's what we're really dealing with. The Air Force takes care of pretty much everything below that. But it's a partnership. Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Brad Washaball, you put an interesting question here in the chat.
I was wondering, thanks, Matt, Brad Washabaugh here, Marine. So Todd has been very good about his Marine jokes thus far, but I think he's just prime, ready to go.
The night is young.
What's the size of Space Force, and what are your component commands? And is NORAD part of Space Command?
All right. Those are a couple, 3 or 4 good questions in there. So Space Force is tiny. If you think about the Air Force, which is about 320,000 people, Space Force is 16,000 total. That's it for an entire service. 8,000 of those are civilians. 8,000 of those are active duty. That's it. It's really, really small. We're only commissioning about 136 officers into the Space Force per year, as compared to the Air Force, which would be commissioning, I think it's close to 3,000. So it's a much, much smaller. You asked about components. So the Space Force is actually the service provider to U.S. Space Command. General Dickinson, Army 4-star, is the commander. And so we provide the forces for them to do their mission. It is a combatant command. It's a new one that used to be, and it went away, and then it came back. General Eberhart was a former U.S. Space Command commander, but it's now come back. And so there are folks that were in the Army, FA-40s, and the Navy and Marines who have all transferred into Space Force because they were doing some sort of Space Force mission. You had to volunteer to do it. They couldn't force you, although for me, because I had 25 and a half years in the Air Force, they basically said, we no longer do space within the Air Force, so switch to Space Force or retire. And I wasn't going to do that. So, and what was your other question, sir?
Was it about NORAD?
Oh, NORAD. Oh, so NORAD is its own separate. So so they're basically protecting kind of the space around North American defense area. But what we do is provide data to them. We have ground-based radars all over the world. I was stationed at Thule, Greenland, about 650 miles north of the Arctic Circle for a year, and in Clear, Alaska, sort of near Denali National Park. And there's several others in England, in Cape Cod, if anybody's near there. There's one in Beale, in upper Northern California. Those radars were originally put where they are for missile warning. So if Russia or someone launched a missile at us, we would see it coming. We would pipe that data, and we would know whether or not it was coming at the United States or where it was headed and how we would react. We would give the president time to react. Because there's energy going out into space already, I like to use my hands because I talk to kids all the time. Energy is already going out into space watching for missiles. Well, if satellites are going by close enough, it will also pick those up, and we can update the catalog through NORAD, who is kind of tracking all of those pieces and parts. So NORAD is the one that we're sending those if there are any inbound missiles or any missile launches that are going out to Kwajalein Atoll or where Russia or China are going to launch them. And then we're also updating the space catalog to see if things are getting deconflicted. Does that help, sir?
Yes, it helps. You are an excellent teacher. I mean, even a Marine like Brad Washabaugh could pick up on.
Oh, there it was. There it was.
On that. That's so great. Ryan All, you have a question here in the chat. I don't know if your mic is working.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. How are you, Ryan?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. You mentioned, sir, that how many people are commissioning into the Space Force, and I'm not too read up on this. So, like, where are they coming from, and how is that process working for these people joining the Space Force? I know when it first started, it seemed like people were being selected and choosing to come into the Space Force, but like, if the people are commissioning in, like, where are those people coming from?
Yes, sir. So the Air Force Academy has some that commission each year. So that 136 is really ROTC. So I apologize. There actually are more than that. Probably 20 or so out of the Air Force Academy, I think, a year. And then OTS has some folks that they're putting through. And then they're actually the enlisted side going through basic training. They had their own flight and basic training. So Air Force ROTC detachments at universities. There are 145 universities that have an ROTC detachment plus some crosstowns. If you want to be in the Space Force, you apply to the Air Force ROTC program, and basically everything's the same at this point because we haven't created our own Space Force ROTC, but you put your name in the hat, you check a little box saying, I'm interested in Space Force. You're absolutely right. You meet a board, you have to do an interview still, and then if you are selected, you're in one of 5 career fields. And I usually get that one. Todd, if it's okay, I'll hit the 5 quick career fields for officers.
Yep.
So you have acquisitions folks who are going to help buy the satellites and ground systems, engineers who are helping confirm things are working or fix things when they're broken, intelligence telling us what threats there are, and I'll go into a little bit of that later if you'd like, Todd. Communications or cyber experts who are protecting our networks because we have petabytes of data coming down from satellites. And I'm a space operations guy. And so when we launch things into space, we help people launch. And then we do the command and control of satellites, making sure that they're in the spot where they're supposed to be in the correct orbit. We can shift them a little bit if need be because they do drift. We're checking on their telemetry that comes down, the temperature. Is it hot? When it's in the sun, it gets in the back and it's going to be cold. How do we make sure the heaters are working? How do we dissipate the heat if it gets too hot? How do I ensure the batteries are fully charged by the solar rays before it goes into the eclipse and gets cold in the back so that it doesn't lose power? And so that's what space operations folks do.
Wow.
So, I mean, my mind currently is blown as a infantry guy. I just don't even know what's going on right now. But that all sounds super awesome. But thank you for answering my question. That's cool. Thank you. That means I appreciate it. That's a great answer.
Yes, business major. I really am not. There are lots of those really smart literal rocket scientists that I work with. My job a lot of times was to translate that rocket scientists and engineers words to normal people. So I've gotten pretty good at it. They're like, oh, you're the lowest common denominator, Matt. Why don't you help us translate these things? So that's me, Napoleon's Corporal.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Colonel,
Yes,
we have one person with us who I think would be a wonderful Space Force guardian. Julia Parsons was a Navy wave in World War II, a code breaker. She turns 102 on March 2nd. Julia, is your microphone working? No, we can't hear you again. Oh, darn it. Because Julia, maybe if you take out your earphones and put them back in, sometimes that helps. Oh, she may have dropped off. She was also an English teacher, and so I was going to have her. Oh, there you are.
There
Hey,
she
Julia.
is. Yes, we can hear
Julia,
you.
how are you?
Oh, yeah, I'm fine.
I can
Everybody
picture you.
looks great.
Yeah, you look great.
Oh, thank you.
I
It's
bet
lovely
you.
to see you.
Yeah, your birthday is coming up March 2nd. Oh, we lost your mic again. We lost your microphone. We can't hear you. If you take it out your earphones and put them back in, I think that'll do it. And I bring it up just because I can imagine Julia joining Space Force. Paul Wylazinski, United States Navy. He says, that's all well and good, Colonel, but can anyone in Space Force polish brass or swab decks?
I went to the Citadel. I promise you I had to do all of those details at the Citadel. I don't have to do it anymore, though.
You had to do. When you're back online, when we can hear you, Julia, let us know. Ron
I think
Gianta.
I'm on.
Oh,
Am
there
I
you are.
on?
Yeah.
Okay,
Perfect.
you're on.
Perfect.
So-
Yes, ma'am.
Very quickly,
Okay.
I'm going to put up here, Julia, very, very quickly. This is the question that Ryan put in the chat. Okay. This is how he worded it.
Oh,
So silly question, but where are the people being commissioned from? Julia, you were an English teacher. What is the incorrect grammar here?
something's dangling.
Yeah. Dangling participle right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you had
The
your
old-
red pen, Julia, you would be writing all over that. You get an F for that, Ryan. All right. Ron Gianta, you, I know, had a question that you wanted to ask. Are you unmuted?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah. How are
Yes,
you,
sir.
Ron? We're going to hear from you later about some VA updates.
Okay, Colonel Morand, you probably remember back in your younger years that the Air Force talked about the total force construct that came up in 2004. Now, when we talk about total force construct and we talk about Space Command, what percentage of Space Command is Air National Guard and Air Force Reserve?
Really good question, sir. Right now, it has been decided that there won't be any Space National Guard. They've decided that because space is a global mission, they don't have a need for Space National Guard. I don't know that I don't know that I agree with that because I think it'd be a really good thing, but don't quote me on that and get me in trouble.
Yeah.
We have reserve associate units, lots of them all over, and I don't have those numbers for you. I apologize, but we have them in Colorado Springs. There were 2 or 3 of them. 9SOPS was doing GPS. We had lots of reserve associate units because they do a federal mission, and so we have lots of those. So I don't have that number with me, though. I apologize.
Okay.
Wonderful question. Thank you, Ron. And again, we'll be hearing from Ron again. Chris Perolo, you had your hand up. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Hello, everybody. Colonel, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
First, I want to mention, Todd, I was at the event you mentioned there where Space Force were sworn in, and there I think I counted 9 of them. It was the smallest contingent, but you're right. There was something about the way they carried themselves and looked that
Yep.
you could spot them in the room. I agree with that 100%. So that was very interesting. Colonel, is it safe to, first of all, Patrick Air Force Base is now called Patrick Space Force Base. I saw it on the sign when I was down there in March in that area. Is the Air Force now pretty much going to be in charge of launches, all the groundwork to get the assets into space, and then Space Force pretty much would be the controllers or the people who operate this equipment? And I'm thinking specifically of, well, let me ask, can you tell us anything about the X-37B and its role in the mission?
Yes, sir. Okay, so I'll start with the launches. So the Space Force will do the acquiring and launching and operating of the satellites. And so the Space Force base, we are doing all of the space part of that. What the Space Force isn't doing, we don't have JAGs, we don't have security forces, we don't have doctors, nurses, lawyers, those types of things. But if it's related to launch, besides securing the area, basically we're gonna be involved with the Space Force. And then hopefully, does that answer that part of that question? Then I'll jump into your next one.
Chris,
I can
Right. Yes. No. Yes. Yes. It's that's very good. I'm glad you brought that up. JAG officers and medical and things like that. That's a good clarification too. But yes, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Okay. And then you asked about X-37B. It is a space research asset. You can put different payloads on and do testing. How about that? And it stays up for a very long period of time and then comes back. It looks like a small space shuttle. If you all remember the space shuttle, it looks like a mini one of those. And they put payloads on there and test them out to see how they'll do in space.
And that would be shared by DARPA and Space Force and Air Force altogether.
You know a lot about that program. Yes, sir. It used to be classified that it even existed, that thing was we didn't talk about it being up there. It's been up, I think 400, it went up for like 400 and something days recently. It was the longest extended and then return asset that we had. It's pretty interesting. I'm glad it's a really cool program. You're certainly welcome to Google it. I can't get into a whole lot of detail about it, but it is a pretty neat program.
we have
Very
a
good.
smart group of people in our crew.
You
Chris
do.
Perlo among them. Bob Flage, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I've got 2 questions, or a question and a statement. The question is, what is the organizational structure of the Space Force? Army's got platoons, companies, battalions. How are you laid out in your structure?
Yes, sir.
Love it.
So there are so the chief of space operations and is at the Pentagon, just like you would think they normally would be. Underneath that are some 3-star commands. There's a training command, an operations command, there's an intelligence command that are doing different. Well, I guess the intelligence one actually is a delta, but they're organized under 3 stars. And then from the 3-star, because it's a pretty flat organization, it goes to a colonel. And so they're colonels, and they're called deltas. It used to be kind of an equivalent of an Air Force wing. The Space Force decided to combine wings and groups into one, and they call them deltas. And those deltas are doing ground-based radars. They're doing satellite command and control. They're doing electronic warfare. There are, I'm going to get the number wrong because I honestly have not been in Space Force since it stood up. I've been in Air Education and Training Command at the Citadel. But there, I believe it's 6 different deltas. And don't quote me, I usually have a slide in front of me that kind of helps me roll through that one. But they're deltas. And so they're probably 1,800 to 2,000 people inside each delta. Underneath that are squadrons. So there's a GPS squadron. There's, that does your GPS satellites for you. There's one that does satellite military communications. So MilSatcom. It used to be a Discus satellite, and now it's MilStar and advanced DHF satellites are in different squadrons. And those are probably 100 to 200 people in each of those. Does that answer your question, sir? There we go. Look right there. You got it.
Oh, yeah, yes.
There you go. And that's
Yeah.
under the Space Operations Command. There you have it.
I was puzzled by that too. When I saw the deltas, I didn't understand that. So they're the equivalent of like the numbered air forces?
No, sir. So those deltas are really the equivalent of a wing. It's a kernel that
wing.
runs through
Okay,
N06.
equivalent
Yes,
of a
sir.
wing. Got it. Got
And
it.
the numbered air force is the one up above it. The Space Operations Commander is like a numbered air force.
Got it. Oh, good. Okay. Yes. So when you're a recruit and after you graduate basic training and you go to, I guess, the equivalent of advanced individual training, do you get to kind of choose or have your preference for what your delta you'll join?
My understanding is I had a similar thing when I was young, but they will go through the course that it's not really AIT, but that's the equivalent of it. It's undergraduate space and missile training, what we used to call it, undergraduate space training.
Okay.
I believe they do a 1 to N rack and stack, and they say these are all the different places you can go. We have 5 in this delta and 4 in this delta, 3 in this delta, whatever left over, and so not left over, available to you, and then you can pick. I believe they're able to pick. I again have not been in the Space Force side in a while. Either they are out the lieutenants are getting to pick like I used to get to pick, or in that rack and stack, somebody in a delta is saying, hey, I want the number 1. Okay, you get the number 2 pick this time. But they're getting to pick based on their order of merit, either getting picked or getting 2 picked.
I see. You're wearing BDUs.
I am OCPs. Yes, sir. OCPs. The new version of
Okay.
them.
Yeah.
What about the dress uniform? Who designed that?
So that's still in it's a prototype still, and the chief of space operations and the chief master sergeant of the Space Force and a few others are doing a wear test for the prototype. That's it right there. And so the 2 on the outside edges are wearing that. And so they're still wear testing it. They have not fully officially said it's a thing. I'm going to retire before they make it mandatory because it's going to cost me a lot of money if I have to buy those. So I'm going to stick with my Air Force Class A's with the, all we do is put a little Delta wing kind of on our collar. You can see on General Raymond in the middle. He was the former chief of space ops.
And the big criticism of the uniforms, or at least this iteration of the uniforms, or the baggy pants.
I know. So I know those 2. I cannot believe that the Space Force didn't pay a tailor to do a better job. Ali Gonzalez is there on the left. She's a lieutenant colonel. I've worked with her before. She was embarrassed that the photos looked that way, and I think they should have done a better job with the tailors, my opinion.
Yes. Man, this is so great. Renee, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I just put a box of stuff to you in Gainesville, Florida, so you should be receiving it fairly soon.
Wonderful. Okay, here's my question. Going back into history, there was an Army Air Force during World War II, and then it split and became the Army and the Air Force, and the Army got their aircraft and the Air Force got their aircraft. And then somewhere in the early to mid 60s, the Air Force noticed that the Army had the Caribous, and they threw a little hissy fit and made them turn them all over. Additionally, there used to be, and may still be, an Army security agency, and they were doing a lot of the same work that the Colonel has described the Space Force will do. What measures are being taken to make sure that there aren't these overlapping conflicts and everybody gets their feelings hurt?
Yes, ma'am. That's another good question. You do have some really, really smart people in this crowd. These are tougher than I'm used to.
These are tough. Yeah.
These are very tough.
You didn't know you were getting into.
So the service chiefs, so they are the joint chiefs. All the service chiefs sat down together and they discussed what things do we have that are space related, touch space, travel through space, stay in space. Should we or should we not give all of this to Space Force? Now, there was a lot of strong arming to push everything to the Space Force to do the command and control of and provide the force provider for, and then Space Command, U.S. Space Command. So we really need to take all of these things under our umbrella. I don't have all of the one-off things. There are certainly other agencies, 3-letter agencies and DARPA and folks that still deal with space, but they're going to do a lot of coordination with Space Force and U.S. Space Command. One, not only just to make sure we're not overlapping missions, that you're doing a GPS type mission over here and I'm doing the actual GPS type mission, but deconflicting launches, where I'm going to put these things, what orbits am I putting them in? There are low Earth orbits that I mentioned earlier. They're only up, like the space station is up probably 230, 250 miles. It's going around every 90 minutes, 90 to 98 minutes. It's moving really fast. GPS is out at about 11,000 miles, and they're going around less frequently and not quite as fast in your mind. There are about 32 of those in different planes. So in different orbital planes, different things like that. And what you need is 4 of them to get yourself a good timing and location, distance, and where you're going. And then geosynchronous orbits. So if you think about on the side of many of your houses, you probably have a satellite dish that sits still and points to one area. It's not swinging around and hitting you when you're mowing the yard. That is because we put somebody really smart, much smarter than I, many years ago, figured out that the Earth spins at a certain speed. If I put a satellite out at 22,000 nautical miles, its orbit will move the same speed the Earth turns underneath it. So in reference to where you are on Earth, that thing is stationary. It's called a geostationary orbit, and it sits in the same spot and basically broadcasts to about a third of the Earth. So those orbits, we have to deconflict who gets what slots and what, there's, a priority. Who's going to get the ones over the United States? Lots of smaller countries that aren't quite as advanced are getting a little huffy with us because we've taken a lot of the slots, because we've been putting lots of stuff up for the last 40 years. And so what does a small country that needs a slot, kind of where the US is looking right now, how do they get a slot? And so there are lots of discussions about who's going to control that. And there are organizations that do that right now and help deconflict some of that.
Wow. Jeff Witherall.
Sir, question about the personnel. You talked about the deltas. Now, when somebody's selected for a certain delta, do they do their whole career in that delta, or do they jump around?
The intent is to have them do the majority of their time in that one delta and occasionally go out and do a little broadening into another delta and then come back to the main delta. Now, I think they are doing that because as they groom people to be general officers, they're going to need to understand a little bit of another here and there. We did the same thing in the Air Force for a while, all the different subcategories of space. Some people had touches of a lot of them, and they decided that their best idea was, let's make people really deep in one, and maybe let them go out and touch 1 or 2 others a little bit, but let's keep them really steeped in one.
Sure.
Chris Parolo.
Colonel, hello again. I wasn't sure I was going to go there, but I cannot resist. Full disclosure, I'm U.S. Navy. And I've been wondering for a long time, you know the relationship between the Marine Corps and the U.S. Navy. Marine Corps falls under Department of the Navy. Space Force was not organized that way, and I'm wondering why. Why wasn't it a separate force under the Department of the Air Force?
It is.
It is.
Actually,
I think it is.
That's how it falls?
Yes, sir. We are exactly like the Navy Marine Corps. We have the Secretary of the Air Force Chief of Staff, and the Chief of Space Operations. It's exactly the same relationship. So that's perfect because a lot of people don't get that. And that's one of the things I end up explaining. So that's perfect.
Right. It's not talked about that way. It was never promoted that way. But I always thought that was the best way to organize it in tandem like that. And now you're saying that it is. So I withdraw my question and thank you very much.
No, I appreciate you bringing it up because that's a really good point for people to understand, right? It's a relationship very similar to the way the Navy and Marine Corps is set up.
Colonel, what made you switch and join Space Force from Air Force?
Sure. So I started out in missiles, ICBMs in Grand Forks, North Dakota, hoping to never have to turn a key and launch. At that time, our career field, missiles and space, were both the same MOS, AFSC in Air Force terms. And so after I finished Grand Forks, I went to the space side and did space for 22 more years. But I was doing space within the Air Force. When the president said, we're going to stand up the Space Force, the Air Force said, we are no longer doing space things in the Air Force. So all of you that do space things have an option. You're either going to voluntarily go over to Space Force, separate or retire. Well, I was already at the 25-year-ish point when they stood this up, and I said, man, I'm not ready to retire. I just got this job at the Citadel. I'm back where I graduated from college, where I commissioned, and I work in the same building where I commissioned downstairs. In about 4 months, I'm going to retire in that same auditorium. So I wanted to stay and continue doing what I love to do. So that's why I transferred.
So we're getting you right at the tail end of your career.
You are. Oh, and here's for my Marine friends. So when I had to switch to Space Force, I had to resign my commission from the United States Air Force. I went downstairs to my Marine 06 counterpart, Russ Boyce, and said, Russ, will you commission me into the Space Force? So I left the Air Force and had a Marine commission me into the Space Force because he's my really good friend on campus. He's a great guy.
Oh, how great. How great. And that brings up something before we get to Bill Confer. You know, I've got to confess here, Bill Boswell, thank you, Colonel, Air Force Colonel. He sent me a note saying how a mistake I made. When you talk as much as I do, when you write as much as I do, you're going to say a few dumb things. And I say more than my fair share. And one of the things that I said, it was so dumb. In the email that I sent out to promote this program, I said, join us for a conversation about all things Space Force with Colonel Matthew A. Morand, who commands one of the largest ROTC programs in the nation at the Citadel. Colonel Morand swore the oath of allegiance to Space Force in February 2021 after 25 years as an Air Force officer. Colonel Boswell, Bill Boswell, sent me an email saying, hey, you don't swear allegiance to the branch that you're serving, you swear allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. He's absolutely right. And I mea culpa for that. Bill Confer.
Yes, hi. Colonel, I'd just like to know, you must have some sort of a liaison or somebody that deals with the United Nations, because if you've got all those other countries that want room up there, and we're taking it all, why, how do you do that? Do you just go to the Nikki Haley's of the world and talk to whoever's in that slot at the time?
I love the South Carolina reference. That was well done, sir. We have something called the Joint Space Operations Center out at Vandenberg Space Force Base in Santa Barbara, California, and there is a commercial side where our information can be passed to the commercial side for when they launch. And we also have one for our coalition partners and everyone. So several years ago, a defunct Russian weather satellite was going to run into one of our defunct Iridium satellites. And I was working at the National Reconnaissance Office. This was in a low Earth orbit. They were coming at each other at 17,500 miles an hour each. And if they hit each other, the debris field was going to be massive. Millions of pieces smaller than 1 centimeter. It would be really hard to track, make a mess for our satellites and for our manned spaceflight. So we actually notify other countries, Russia included, China included, when we realize that there's going to be some sort of a potential collision in space, a COLA. So we notify them through, we have lots of different phone numbers for their operations floors, for their Space Force equivalents. Does that help you? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, is there a person in the Space Force that actually, who did that? One of the deltas that actually communicated?
It's actually, I'm sorry, sir, my apologies. The Space Operations Command, that 3-star general, has an operations floor in his command in the building where he works. And okay. he's got somebody there. That operations floor will get that information and they'll make those phone calls. So it's under that 3-stars operations floor.
All right. I have another question if I could, Todd.
Yes, absolutely.
I was in the Halikoa several years ago when we got a bomb alert that there was a missile coming to Hawaii. And some people really freaked out about that. But I was actually in the PX, which is underground. So I wasn't as concerned as all the people that were jumping through hoops. But I can't imagine that if I'd had children in a school in Hawaii, what I would have done for that 10 to 15 minutes it took for them to rectify and take down that alert. That was, I guess, an individual error, a human error, but have we fixed that? Do you know?
So I can help you understand how it normally should work. And so yeah. It's really a dorky sounding term, dual phenomenology. You have a satellite that normally is looking at the disk of the Earth, and it's looking against the cold background of space. When a launch happens, it's going to see a hot spot coming off the Earth, and it's going to track it. So those SIBRs, space-based infrared systems, and other satellites are going to then send a warning down to NORAD and other places. Ground-based radars, like I was saying, as at Thule and Clear in those places, are also sending energy out. They'll pick it up later because normally it's behind the Earth, like in reference to them. Normally, before you're going to submit or put out an alert like that, sir, you're going to have the satellite not only say, yes, I see something, but a ground-based radar that confirms that something is going in the direction that they're going. I don't know where the breakdown happened in that specific case, but we're pretty good at getting them, because if I'm in Clear Alaska and I'm in Thule, Greenland, and I have a satellite or two, you have a pretty good idea that it's either going that direction or not. There are times, like our ground-based interceptors, if somebody were going to shoot an ICBM at the United States, our ground-based interceptors receive the missile defense data from a lot of those sensors. If we launch a ground-based interceptor from California to go shoot down a missile coming from Russia, or let's say it's coming from China, it may look like it's going towards Russia, but we'll pick them up and call them the Moscow link and say, listen, we're launching a ground-based interceptor to shoot this thing down. So we try to de-escalate on our side before those things happen. Other countries will also tell us if they're going to do a space launch. They aren't required to, but again, to de-escalate things, Russia is very good about it. Other countries are pretty good about it. India launched and shot down one of their own. But if they're going to launch something into space and it might look like it's on a track towards the United States, they will call us and let us know that they're doing it, so we don't get that horrible alert like you're talking about, because that would not be a good day.
Yeah. My son-in-law actually went to Russia on a DARPA contract, and he worked with them on a friendly fire type thing with their computers, so that their computers would be able to identify quicker. So I was surprised. He went from the University of Mississippi in Starkville, but I was surprised that DARPA had such a contract. But
you want them to know that it's not a real threat, and so you don't want them getting their ICBMs and their folks getting ready to turn keys at a mistake. It's something that really isn't supposed to be a threat. So we do try to communicate as much as we can. That's pretty interesting that he went there. That's cool.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
We are honored to have the universally recognized greatest history teacher in Canada with us, Mr. Scott Masters. Thank you, Scott, for joining us as always.
Thank you for the compliment. I'm not sure how many of my students would agree with that. They're all doing their major projects right now, so they're not too happy with me. But I had a question, actually. I happen to teach Colonel Morand a grade 12 politics class, and one of the things we look at in the international law section is space law. And looking at the textbook, there's a lot of things that go back 30, 40 years. I don't know how relevant they are anymore, but I'm wondering if you guys are developing your doctrine in view of the space law that exists through the UN and other agencies.
Yes, sir. So right now there isn't a whole lot of set in stone law. The International Space Treaty was in 1972 or 1973. Says you won't put weapons of mass destruction in space or on a heavenly body or whatever the right terminology. It's been a while since I took a space policy class. I apologize for that. I'm probably messing it up a little bit. There isn't a whole lot not a lot of countries have signed off on those things and say we will abide by this. What we're doing right now is basically customs and courtesies and handshakes. When you're going to launch something into space, we agree that we're going to try to minimize the amount of debris we put up there. If you launch a satellite into space and it's going out in geosynchronous orbit, you have a first stage, you have a second stage, you have a payload fairing, which is kind of the nose cone around it, right? All of those things become space debris. And so we have sort of handshake agreements right now saying we'll do our best not to do these things. It's really hard for very advanced countries like the US and Russia and China to try to write a very broad policy, because other countries don't have the wealth or funds to put behind, well, yes, I can recover that. I can bring a SpaceX rocket back down and land it on my pad and recover that thing so it's not up in space causing debris or it doesn't come back down on other people. So trying to write policy that the world will abide by for space is tough. If you think about, the Navy and the seas, how did that go for a long time? It was hundreds of years before somebody really got that the oceans, the law of the sea. I'm going to get it wrong, and all the Navy people will shake their heads at me. But we're only a few decades into this space thing. So you're absolutely right. We need to do better, and people are looking at it. But right now, it's tough to write something that everybody will agree to, or even the majority of parties will agree to.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I started working with veterans at midlife, and my kind of time that I've spent, all the time that I've spent with veterans over the past 15 years has greatly improved my life and improved my character. And one of the veterans who I think has had the biggest impact on me is Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Rush Wright. Hello, hello, Ben. He is a retired Air Force colonel and also a retired Episcopal priest. He's a former board member of the Veterans Breakfast Club, consummate, hardworking, selfless volunteer. Ben, how are you?
Well, I'm doing great. Thank you, Todd. Well, Colonel Morand, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I was wondering if you would comment a little bit about military operations in space, both offensive and defensive. You brought up electronic warfare. And of course, we had a recently announced national policy that we would no longer develop or deploy anti-satellite weapons, such as the old ASAT missile that they used to zoom launch off F-15s towards a hostile satellite if that became necessary. So where are we that you can talk about national policy on both offensive and defensive military operations in space?
Offensive gets a little bit touchy, sir, but I can give you some operational experience on a few of the things, and maybe that'll help you. The policies, again, I've been at the Citadel for the last 2.5 years, so I'm not quite as up to speed on what the latest policies are for weapons in space. We don't want to put weapons in space. You're absolutely right. The F-15s that we used to use to shoot down our satellites just to test it made a huge mess. We told people, don't do this. Well, Russia went ahead and did it. And then Russia said, hey, don't do this. We're making a big old mess out of space. China ended up doing it. They shot their own down with a ground-based missile. It wasn't so good. India has done it. They waited until that satellite got good and low, so the debris came in pretty quickly. We, the United States, actually used a Navy Standard Missile 3 not long ago. The NRO, before I got there, had a satellite that didn't make it into the proper orbit, some bad programming. It had a titanium tank full of really caustic, harmful fuel. It was brand new, completely full. And the plan was to burn that satellite back in because it was going to be in low enough orbit. They realized that titanium tank might survive that re-entry, and it might hit someplace where we didn't want it to hit, because it's not a real exact science when you're bringing something to burn in. It gets a little shallow, it skips off and goes too far. It gets steep and it comes straight down. And so what they decided to do was bring the satellite as low in orbit as they could. I think it was roughly 80 miles. Use a Standard Missile 3 off of a ship. So you're going to use a missile to shoot something going 17,500 miles per hour. And they hit it at a really low orbit and hit it as it was slowly coming down. And the debris was gone. 98% of the debris was gone in 2 revolutions within 3 hours. And the rest of it is burned back in. But when people don't do it responsibly, that responsible use of space and the policies, we might say we're not developing a space weapon, but a Standard Missile 3 was never developed as a space weapon. I'll give you a couple more examples if you don't mind, if I have just a second. Russia launched a satellite up into space and was looking at one of our national satellites, one of our really expensive ones I mentioned earlier. And it got close to it and it was just kind of looking at it. And so we moved our satellite, the United States did, put its back to the sun. And so now the satellite is staring right in the sun, and they moved a little closer and tried to shift around. And then it popped out a small satellite. You know what Russian nesting dolls are. Most of you kind of understand what that is. Well, it had a little satellite inside and it popped it out. And that satellite got even closer to us. And so again, we're trying to maneuver and try to keep these things from looking at us or seeing what we're doing. And that one popped out a baby. So it had a big to medium to small. And that was basically just an engine with a chunk of metal on it. And it was a threat. And they said, yep, we can do this. And then they stacked them all back and they basically drove off, right? They flew off into an orbit. So those are the kinds of threats we see in space. We say congested because it's getting crowded, and contested because Russia did that. The Chinese put a satellite up and it had a grappling hook. It looked like a little T-Rex with one arm. They said, oh, this is for recovery of our satellites. We'll hold on to it and we'll do some maybe refueling or some maintenance on our satellites. Well, not long ago, they put that satellite over to a defunct satellite, grabbed a hold of it, boosted it out a few hundred miles, let go of that satellite in a non-usable orbit, and then brought that satellite back with its little arm. And so now it's still going around the belt. And so there are these threats to our satellites, but if you have a satellite let's say your payload, your communications, your GPS, whatever it is, isn't working anymore, but I still have thrusters that still work. If a satellite's going 17,000 miles per hour and crosses paths with me, I don't really have a space weapon. But if it's going 17,000 miles per hour, and this is a defunct weather satellite, and I smash it into one of your really important high-end satellites, that's a weapon in my mind, but I didn't make a space weapon. So you're absolutely right, sir. The concern is we shouldn't be developing weapons to put in space, but you can make pretty much anything a weapon that's going 17,500 miles per hour. I'm not an expert in the space policy, I apologize, but that's, when people ask me questions about like weapons in space, we talked about dropping titanium rods from space, because those rods from God, you can Google it. I don't have any background on the detail. I just Googled it. Those things will make a huge hole in the earth because they're going to get terminal velocity and they're going to make a huge hole. Is a straight titanium rod really a weapon in space? And so again, these policies in space are really difficult for people to understand and to write and get people to agree to.
Boy, is this interesting. Kenneth, you're next. Before we get to you, I do want to announce that next week's program on Monday, February 13th, next week's VBC Happy Hour will be about stories from Black Vietnam veterans. It is Black History Month. February is, and we're having Samuel Black, who's a wonderful director of the African American Museum here in Pittsburgh, History Museum. And he wrote this wonderful book, Soul Soldiers, African Americans in the Vietnam Era. And so we're looking to get Vietnam veterans, Black Vietnam veterans, to come and share their stories. That'll be next Monday, a week from tonight, 7 p.m., February 13th. We also, of course, we've already mentioned this, our great Vietnam Veterans Day event is coming up on March 29th at 6 p.m. I know at some places it's been advertised as 6:30. It is 6 o'clock, and I'll try to correct all those discrepancies out there on social media and on the website. March 29th, I did put the registration link here in the chat and also on the Facebook side. If people want to join us, we do ask that you register, and I'll be talking more about that event as in the days ahead. We do publish a magazine. I'm a writer, I'm a historian. VBC magazine comes out quarterly. We take the stories that we hear at our events and we write them up and we send them out free of charge to anybody who wants to receive it. Right now, we send it out to about 8,000 households and print up another 7,000 or so for distribution. Bob Flage, I just sent a box to him. Larry Guggens, I'll be taking a box or two to our tent dinner coming up on February 18th. And distributing them there, whether you like it or not. So please, if you don't get this magazine in the mail, let me know. Just email me, Todd, TODD, at veteransbreakfastclub.org, and I'll be happy to put one in the mail. Be happy to put a box of them in the mail, so that you could help spread word about the Veterans Breakfast Club. That's the most effective marketing we do. Finally, we always have a live survey on SurveyMonkey. I will put the link here in the chat. 3 simple questions. How do we do? What do you think? What do you like? What do you dislike? How can we improve? That's all we want to know, is how can we improve our programming? And certainly if you have any suggestions for programming, we'd love to have you give us those suggestions as well. Kenneth Boyd, how are things in Hawaii?
They're fine. The question I have is, all of this space debris that you're talking about, is there a plan to collect and dispose of it?
Yes, sir. Another very good question. Several countries and companies are looking into that. Japan, I think, was talking about using a big netting, a metal netting that would be magnetic, that they would drag through different portions of space. Some countries don't like that, because what if you get a hold of one of my defunct satellites and you can use that to look at my technology and you burn it back? You don't burn it back in, but you bring it back in and you're looking at it. I think there will be salvage companies that will probably do something along those lines and try to get a lot of that debris, because it's just going to get worse. If you've seen the movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock, it's a little bit Hollywood, right? There's a little bit of Hollywood magic to that. They said, oh, we've taken out every satellite. Well, they were in a low Earth orbit. They're not going to mess with the GPS in those, but those satellites will get destroyed by that debris if things like that happen. And the human space flight takes the #1 priority all the time, whether it's a Russia, a China, or a US, doesn't matter. We will stop everything we're doing and try to protect those. And so I do think there will be money put into cleaning up our space debris in the future. And we're the worst offenders because we put the most stuff up there.
I think about half of all satellites up in space are American, from my understanding.
That's probably true. The operational ones, yes, sir. The USSR and Russia put a lot up there, but many of those were old and they've probably gone, they're no longer working, they're defunct.
They're defunct. Larry Googans, how are you?
I'm doing great so far.
Good.
As far as I can tell. Colonel Morand, thank you, Moran, thank you very much. This is outstanding. I'm retired Air Force, 21 years, but when you talked about the deltas, I'll use Patrick for Air Force Base, for example. I think it's 45, if I'm correct.
Yes, sir.
So you don't, the Space Command doesn't have any support facilities. They don't have the JAG, all of the supports, but there are support units at Patrick. They're listed as the 45th something. Is there a base commander like there was at Wings that you and I know about, a base commander? And is that base commander Air Force?
Yes, sir. Another good question. So there are garrison commanders, same term the Army uses. So there's a garrison commander that is doing all of those support functions, whether you call them support or not. But for Space Force, they consider them non-Space Force functions, the security and all those types of things. So they're on every Space Force base and Air Force base, the same function that you've always seen. They are just, I'm going to get the term wrong, but basically they are assigned to that base as an Air Force member to support a Space Force mission. And so the security forces folks are still in the Air Force, but they're working on a Space Force base.
I understand. So the other way around, the Space Force is not a tenant at the base.
Not at a Space Force base, but there are some where we might be a tenant on different bases for a period of time.
It's getting a little late. I got one more. When you talked about the deltas, and you talked about if you're in a delta, to switch to another delta. If you're in one, how is the promotion system going? Do you expect it's going to work if you're locked into one delta? If you're in a delta that is just, can I use the word shit hot, and everybody is just outstanding, is there a limit on the promotions? I'll just go on the opposite side of it. If you're an 01 and you can go up to an 05, what if they're filled and they're super hot too, enlisted the same way? Would then you switch to another delta that isn't, I'd say, doing so well, so that you can advance in the promotion cycle? I know that's a tough one. Maybe they haven't figured that out yet, but
I don't know that we have, but that's a really good question. The development teams that now sit down at the Air Force Personnel Center in Randolph manage those career fields. But you're right. If you're number 5 at the really high end one, would you be number 1 over here at the kind of lower end one? Would you do better by going there? Well, the development teams are a bunch of old folks, colonels and generals that get that, and they understand that these are really high speed folks because we need them to be high speed to do this mission, and so they'll give them a little bit of extra credit. I don't know that we have it perfect, to be completely honest with you. I doubt it, but each one of those colonels that's a Delta commander goes and sits on the development team and fights for their people and says, hey, here are all the things this person is doing. And so I'm sure, because we're now promoting within our own career fields, so we're not doing a full Air Force wide, we're doing within career fields.
Yeah, that was my question. It's going to be a lot more difficult, I think, since it is such a smaller group. I hate, and I'm sure you would too, hate to see someone who is really good to bail because he can't get promoted and even retire. Anyway, thank you very much, and thanks for the outstanding presentation.
Yes, sir.
Todd, you owe him something more than this. He's been talking.
Oh my gosh. Larry, I tell you, outstanding is the word. And we really have Dave Seaver to thank. Dave, I know you're on here, another Air Force colonel. Thank you so much for connecting us to Matt. This is absolutely fascinating, just kind of like the change of pace and the education I think that we needed.
Well, I'm an Air Force guy and I'm getting an education too. So because, we really don't know. Going through Air Command and Staff College, you learn about space and intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance and, some of that stuff, but you really don't get the full picture like we've gotten tonight. So I just wanted to say, hi, Col Morand, how you doing?
Hey, Dave, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for connecting me to these folks. We spent 2 months together doing field training. So officers going through ROTC at those universities all go to field training right now at Maxwell. And so Dave and I were down there working together for a few months. He stayed for 3.5 months. I only had to go for 2 as the vice commander. So, but it's good to see you, and thank you for connecting me to this group. I appreciate it. This is fun.
Thank you for playing ball with us and doing this program. I think folks have really enjoyed it. Are you in your office at the Citadel?
No, this is my wife's office at home.
Oh, your
I got-
wife's office. Okay, I was gonna say, 'cause we got to get the dog in the picture. This guy has a great dog.
Hang on, there's the dog. She's sitting outside the door, staring at me growling.
Oh,
She's
is that
staring
a
at me
big
growling.
dog?
There's
Oh
the
my
dog. Yeah, the
gosh.
bulldog. Yeah. So
We
Dave
could
got
do-
to see pictures of her every day. Yes, Bentley's not
Yes.
happy.
Oh, that is so great. I'm a dog lover, and that is a great dog. Hey, before we go to Chris Perolo, Ron Gianta, I do want you to let us know what we should be knowing about the latest coming out of the VA.
Sure, I can do that. Let me see here. Okay, a couple of things I got off the announcements from the VA is getting ready to prepare your taxes, and you can prepare them free with help from the AARP. With tax season approaching, prepare now with AARP foundations. And let me see here. And here's a website that you can go to and to get tax aid for all military personnel, veterans, and for free.
That is great. And that is dedicated to military personnel and veterans.
Yes.
This site.
Now-
Okay, great.
Now there's the new law that just came out, and it's helping survivors get VA, but survivors of veterans that get VA benefits that were afflicted or exposed to toxic material. Brand new, it just came out, and they're making this new law is going to make it easier for survivors of veterans exposed to toxic material, including burn pits, to receive dependency and indemnity compensation. Those are DIC claims. And here comes a website for that. And another announcement is disability housing grants are available for veterans, people like Larry that's involved with the Vietnam veterans, and a whole bunch of other people that are associated with other groups, American Legion, VFW. They always come in contact or hear about veterans who are homeless, and veterans and service members with service connected disabilities can receive housing grants from the VA to buy, build, or modify a home to meet their needs. So we have a lot of disabled veterans out there that need help. And here comes a website that they can go to get more information about housing grants for adaptive housing for disabled veterans. And there's going to be a virtual minority veteran outreach symposium on February 9th from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock p.m. And this is because it's Black History Month. They're going to, the audience will be minority veterans nationwide, service members, family members, caregivers, survivors, the VA staff and outreach coordinators and veteran advocates. They're all going to have a symposium where people can listen in, participate, and get information for our minority veterans. And last but not least, the Pittsburgh VBA is open on 17th floor of the Federal Building. You can call for an appointment. You can send an email. You can contact them about questions about your particular benefits if you have a disability claim pending, or how to file a disability claim. And there's the phone number. It's in the chat, and also the email that you can just send them an email and saying, hi, my name is John Smith, and I need to talk to somebody about filing a claim, or I need to talk to somebody about what is the status of my appeal. So that's just some good information to help veterans find out what's going on with their particular issues or their claims or whatever. Oh, and by the way, Colonel Morand, I'm also a retired colonel, 32 and a half years with the Air National Guard, United States Air Force. And I just have one question for you as being a field commander. Can I ask you, Todd?
Yeah.
Okay. So we all know, as a commander of a unit, you have a manning document. And in that manning document tells you how many people you have, how many AFSCs or positions. Also, you have grade limitations in that manning document. So do your deltas operate the same way with a manning document with specific people doing specific jobs with grade limitations within that? And how do you overcome somebody who is maxing out at a grade and they need to go up one because they've already maxed out the number of years they could for a particular grade?
So right now, sir, we're using the Air Force model. We're still using the same, billets, the manpower documents, UMDs, all of the same things where I was just in the same AMS system I think we probably used when you were checking, and you go in there and you say, how many enlisted folks do I have? I have 4. I have 3 staff sergeants and 1 tech sergeant. These are all the billet numbers. This is who's sitting on them. I do the same thing for my officers. Luckily, for me right now, where I am, I have instructors, so I can get any AFSC. But in the deltas, you're going to have 13 Sierra space operations. You're going to have 14 November, which are intelligence. You're going to have 17 deltas, which are cyber. You're going to have 63 alphas who are doing your acquisitions, and 62Es who are going to be your engineers. So that is all you're allowed to have, those AFSCs for the officers. The enlisted, there are 3 AFSCs, and that's it. And so their manning document. Now, will there be some admin folks maybe from the Air Force side that are probably in there as well? But right now, we're doing exactly the same way you and I did in the Air Force when we're both in the Air Force.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chris Perlow.
Colonel, hello again. Sorry to be a pest here, but I thought of something that hasn't been talked about in length. Recruiting. I read that Space Force is the only service that's meeting its goals lately. Go figure. But I wondered if they did it like like they used to do in the Navy. You take your ASVAB. Well, first of all, if Air Force is recruiting for Space Force, or whether they co-locate a Space Force recruiter in an Air Force recruiting office. I don't know if that would work, but you used to take the ASVAB test, and if you were real high up, they would try and snag you into the nuclear program in the Navy. So I wonder if Air Force is doing something similar where they see those scores and say, aha, and then they try and, talk them into, not talk them in, but, offer them Space Force right up front. Or are they having more success on a one-on-one basis going into the schools and the colleges? What's the strategy or the tactic in recruiting these days?
Yes, sir. So broadly, we're using many of the same things the Air Force did. So we still take the ASVAB for enlisted. We take the AFOQT for officers. You have to score a certain level to get cyber. When you are qualified for cyber, you will check a box that says, I'm interested in Space Force as well as Air Force, or the other way around. Right? I'm only interested in one or the other. That's what our cadets are doing right now. I'm a cyber cadet, right, taking classes, and I want to be a cyber officer. Yep, I think I want to be in Space Force. Then both the Air Force and Space Force will board them. We'll see where they fall out depending on the criteria. Space Force may have a different set of criteria. They do, in fact, have a different set of criteria for an order of merit. And so if you, a cadet, fall out in a higher order of merit in Space Force than you did in the Air Force, they will actually ask the Space Force, do you want to hire this person as a cyber operator or whatever? The ASVAB is the one for the enlisted folks. And so if they score high enough, they can say, yep, I want to be Space Force, or no, I want to be Air Force only. And so that's how they're doing it. Right now, because it is such a small force, there isn't a whole lot of recruiting needs. So I always give my Marine buddy a hard time. Like, Marines have the coolest freaking uniforms. They have the best commercials. And I hate standing next to them. We have to go out and do, watch the parade, because they always look so freaking good. And you're like, God, I hate you, Russ. But they do really well recruiting. Well, Space Force doesn't need a lot of that. We have some commercials that talk about, yeah, space is hard. I don't know if you've seen that when General Raymond says, yeah, space is hard. But it's new and it's cool. And people are like, oh, technology, and kids want to be a guardian. So we aren't having to do a ton right now. It will eventually come to that, I'm sure. But we're in like, I've been to middle schools and high schools. We're in many of the colleges talking to students, not cadets. I'm sorry, I'm stuck in a senior military college mindset. Students who are freshmen and sophomores, do you want to come into our program? Do you want to go in the Air Force or Space Force? And then we start making the delineation. When you meet this board, you're going to check a box that says, I'm interested in Space Force. You're going to have to do an interview. You're going to have to meet these requirements in the AFOQT. Does that help?
That helps. That helps, Chris Perlow. Before we go to Bob Flage, I do want to let people know we have another VIP with us, Jeff Arbeyo, the filmmaker who did the wonderful film. I believe he's still working on the film on the Mobile Riverine Force. So we had a program with him and Mobile Riverine Vietnam veterans not too long ago. Filmmaker also of Scramble the Sea Wolves. Hello, Jeff. Thank you for joining us. So great to see you. I just want to say hello. And do you have anything to announce to us about the film?
Nothing at this time. We're still working on sponsorship and still working away on the movie. And, it's one of those things with this movie is as we keep putting the movie together, we keep finding more stories, and it keeps growing. That's kind of what happened with Scramble the Sea Wolves.
That's right.
I think we were into year 3 when I went back and recut about half the movie because we found so many other stories. And so, it could go on and on forever. So you have to kind of stop it at some point. But, what the Mobile Riverine Force guys went through, and, it's amazing that, a lot of these guys are still here to tell these stories. So we want to do our best to get it right.
Yeah, you want to get the story right. And I just want to say to you, we had a wonderful film screening about our trip to Vietnam in 2018 on January 27th. It was a lot of fun. We love. I think I just realized it's a great way to extend our mission of sharing veteran stories. We do a screening and then we do a conversation with the filmmaker and with people who are in the documentary. And if you ever want to do that with us, we'll love to do it. So just let me know.
Oh, that would be great. That would
All
be
right.
great. Yeah, we'd love to do that. So
Thank you for
we'll
joining
talk
us,
more
Jeff.
about that.
Okay, very good. Bob Flage.
Yes, talking about recruiting, I remember when I joined, I went, after we got sworn in, we went next door, and it was your wish list. Where do you want to go and what station you'd like? And I asked Airborne Infantry, and the guy looked at, I was a Florida State student at the time, and the guy looks at my paperwork and he says, "You can go anywhere you want." And I said, "No, I want Airborne Infantry." So the guy says, "Oh, okay, I guess you want Vietnam too, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Okay, you fool, you got it." That was when I was really young and dumb.
That's right. You wanted it, and because you did, you got it, as we can see from the purple heart on your hat. Man alive. Colonel, you have been so generous with your time, an hour and a half with us, educating us remarkably. I know we're coming at the end of our program. I always search our Zoom room for names that I don't recognize, and I do see a few of them. Paul Walazinski, my Polish mother would. Paul Walazinski, United States Navy. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Meade Stewart, I don't think you've joined us before either. Good to see you. Please do email me if you get a chance. Todd, TODD, at veteransbreakfastclub.org. I know there are a few other new faces here. I think there are a few other new faces, maybe not attached to new names, but just welcome. Please come back. We'd love to have you again. We'd love to hear your story. Let me know how we could keep you updated on our schedule. We'll get our schedule in the mail to you. We send out a weekly email with our schedule. Colonel, I still have a bunch of questions here, but we didn't get to about GPS and a lot of other things. Thank you so much for sharing so much time and expertise with us.
Yes, sir. I was happy to do it. Thank you all for inviting me. Dave, again, thanks for connecting me, and to Sean and Todd. I appreciate the invite. This was really fun. I enjoyed doing this. So if you have more questions, you want me to come back and do it another time, I know it'll probably be way down the road. I'm happy to do that and answer some more. But remember, I'm retiring officially 1 September. Retirement date's going to be 7 July. So
you can still talk to us when you're retired.
I could. Yes,
yeah,
sir.
Definitely. And you passed the audition, so yeah, we'll be asking you back, I think. Thank you so much.
Miss Julia, thank you, ma'am, and happy birthday. Have a wonderful birthday next month. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Take care.
Be something. All right. Hey, everybody, take care. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a good, safe evening, and I look forward to seeing you all next week, Monday night. Take care. Good night.